Why South China Sea is important? The South China Sea is one of the most important international waterways in the world. About 5.3 trillion US dollar in shipborne goods travels into South China Sea annually. Then, fourth leading exporting countries use the South China Sea for their maritime, which is China, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. About 65% of petroleum imports of South Korea, 60% of petroleum imports of Japan and Taiwan, then 50% of petroleum imports of China. Then about 12% of total annual fish catch in the world comes from the South China Sea. And also, South China Sea is dotted with the hundreds of small rocks above high tide. So, if the rocks is only above at high tide, it's considered still land or territory and entitled to territorial sea of 12 nautical miles all around. This amount is 2.55 to 165 hectares of maritime space, more than twice land area of Metro Manila and Singapore. All fish, oil, gas, and mineral resources with huge area belong to the state that has sovereignty, and that's why we have the South China Sea dispute. What is the dispute in the South China Sea? China 9-lines claims enclose 85.7% of the entire South China Sea. China, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei are involved in the dispute. China and the Philippines have a territorial dispute over Scarborough Shoal. This is equivalent to 3 million square kilometers out of the 3.5 million square kilometers surface area of the South China Sea. So this map shows the EEZ of each country plus the 9-line of China. Then the green line was for the Vietnam, and the blue is for Malaysia, the orange is for the Philippines, then the yellow is for the Brunei, and the dots is for Indonesia. Then islands na kung saan nakapaloob ito sa EEZ ng Philippines, which is the Scarborough Shoal, Mischief Reef, Second Thomas Shoal, then the Red Bank. What is the maritime dispute? A maritime dispute refers to overlapping marine zone or territorial sea, EEZ, and the CS, and dispute on the interpretation or application of the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea or the UNCLOS, which is constitution for the ocean and sea of our earth. Then, what is the territorial dispute? A territorial dispute refers to conflicting claims of sovereignty over continental land, island, whether capable of human habitation of its own or not, or rock above water at high tide. Is the Philippine attribution case against China a territorial or a maritime dispute, or both? The Philippine attribution case against China is not territorial dispute but solely a maritime dispute involving the interpretation or application of UNCLOS. The Philippines is not asking the tribunal to rule what state owns certain islands or rocks above water at high tide. The Philippines is asking the tribunal to rule what is the extent of the marine entitlements of certain islands or rocks regardless of what states owns them and whether certain geologic features are LTEs or not. All of these are maritime disputes. This picture shows the geological components, which is the territorial sea baseline or the land territory. Then territorial sea is 0 to 12 nautical lines, then contiguous zone to 12 to 24 nautical lines in the EEZ, which is the 12 to 200 nautical lines. This picture shows the China's claimed territorial waters Then the unclosed 200 nautical mile or exclusive economic zone, then the disputed islands.
Okay, what are the maritime zones under international law? So before I proceed, let me define first what is maritime zone. Okay, maritime zone is a band of water or belt of the sea defined by international treaties and conventions within which the coastal state exercises jurisdictional rights. So, ito yung mga katubigang may mga pag-aari ng isang bansa: internal waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone. Ganun. So, what are the maritime zones under international law? So, before UNCLOS or United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, ang territorial sea ay 3 nautical miles or just like land territory. High seas beyond the territorial sea, not subject to appropriation by any state, belong to all mankind. After UNCLOS, ang territorial sea is 12 nautical miles from baselines, just like land territory. Contiguous zone, 12 nautical miles from outer limit of 12 nautical miles territorial sea. Limited jurisdiction. EEZ or exclusive economic zone, 200 nautical miles measured from baselines, 188 nautical miles measured from outer limit of 12 nautical miles territorial sea. A specific sovereign rights only within the 188 nautical miles area. So, CS or continental shelf, not exceeding 150 nautical miles measured from outer limit of the exclusive economic zone. Living resources belong to all mankind. Non-living resources and sedentary species belong to adjacent coastal state. Ang high seas beyond the exclusive economic zone, living resources belong to all mankind. If no continental shelf of an adjacent coastal state, all non-living resources also belong to all mankind. If there is a continental shelf, non-living resources and sedentary species belong to the adjacent coastal state. The area beyond the continental shelf, all the living and non-living sources belong to all mankind.
How do we know that the West Philippine Sea belongs to the Philippines? Aside from 7th century maps, international treaties, and even Chinese records, we know that the West Philippine Sea belongs to the Philippines because international law says so. Even before the landmark victory of the Filipinos in the Philippines versus China case at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2016.
So this map is published in Frankfurt in 1636 by mapmaker Matthäus Merian. This map is entitled China Veteribus Sinarum Regionum Incolis Tame Dicta. So this map shows China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and Northern Luzon. On the western side of the coastal of Central Luzon, there is an unnamed shoal below the words P. Demandato. The Spanish phrase P. Demandato means the point of command, which implies there was a Spanish military garrison in that coastal place. The unnamed shoal of this coastal place would later be called Panacot by the Jesuit Pedro Murillo Velarde. So this digital reproduction is from Barry Lawrence Roderman Antique Map INC. So this map is published in 1734 in Manila by the Jesuit Pedro Murillo Velarde. So this map is entitled Carta Hydrographica Chorográfica de las Islas Filipinas. This is the oldest map that gives a name to Panakot Shoal. Panakot is the Tagalog word for threat or danger. Prior to this 1734 map, no map had ever given a name to this shoal. Scarborough Shoal had a Tagalog name 213 years before China drew its 9 dash lines map. The Murillo map itself names two Filipinos, Francisco Suarez, who drew the map, and Nicolas de la Cruz Bagay, who engraved it. This map is considered the mother of all Philippine maps. This digital reproduction is from U.S. Library of the Congress.
Can a state claim historic rights to maritime zones? Historic rights or historic title cannot be invoked to claim EEZs or CS. The creation of the EEZ under UNCLOS with sovereign rights or supreme rights granted to the adjacent coastal state extinguish all historic rights or claims by other states to the EEZ of a coastal state. The word exclusive in the term EEZ means the economic exploitation of the zone is exclusive to the adjacent coastal state. No one may exploit the natural resources in the EEZ without the express consent of the coastal state. The high seas have always been part of the global commons, whether before or after UNCLOS. The high seas could not be subject to sovereignty by any state, whether before or after UNCLOS. Is there legal basis under international law to China's 9 dash lines claim? There is no legal basis whatsoever. The well-entrenched doctrine in the law of the sea is that the land dominates the sea, which means that all maritime zones are measured from the coast of continental land, island, or rock. China's 9 dash lines are not measured from baselines along its coast and thus do not comply with the basic requirement under UNCLOS for validly drawing maritime zones as stated by the ICJ in the 1969 North Sea cases. The land is the legal source of the power which a state may exercise over territorial extensions to seaward. The high seas can never be subject to the sovereignty of a state, whether before or after UNCLOS. UNCLOS declares no state may validly purport to subject any part of the high seas to its sovereignty.
So for many decades, prior to the 2012 Scarborough Shoal standoff, the disputes in this part of the world remained dormant. It only escalated in 2012 after China sent paramilitary ships to Scarborough and blocked its perimeter to keep Filipino vessels and fishing boats away from the area. In response, and because of its significantly weaker military capabilities, the Philippines resorted to international law, the great equalizer of nations. In 2013, it filed a case against China at the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, or ITLAS, concerning maritime questions in the West Philippine Sea. Surprisingly, a lot of countries supported the Philippines in its case against China. The US and its allies in the European Union such as Germany, France, and the United Kingdom expressed their support for the decision to take the matter to court. Likewise, Vietnam, Japan, and Australia supported the move, emphasizing that the rule of law should prevail over acts of war in resolving the disputes. Finally, in 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration handed out a landmark victory for the Philippines and declared China's 9 dash lines and historical claims on the entire South China Sea is illegal. It also declared key features in the West Philippine Sea as falling within the Philippines Maritime Zone.